Welcome to our viewers on WPRI.com. If you're just tuning in, we had a very lively 60-minute debate on WPRI 12, and now we're going to continue this conversation between Congressman David Cicilline and his Republican challenger Brendan Doherty with questions from Eyewitness News viewers. We're going to go to our first question with Edward Acorn from the Providence Journal.
Thanks. This is from Martha in Woonsocket. I'll start with Mr. Cicilline. Please tell us what your greatest accomplishment was as mayor and congressman, and how will this experience help you in the upcoming 2 years as our congressman?
I would say the greatest accomplishment was the work that was done in reforming and improving the Providence Police Department and developing community policing, which brought the city to the lowest crime rate in 30 years. It gives me an opportunity to understand the value of fighting for cops grants and for understanding how important it is that there be a federal partnership in public safety.
Mr. Doherty, she wants the same question of you. What was your greatest accomplishment as Colonel of State Police, and how will this experience help you in the upcoming 2 years as our congressman?
Sure. I had many individual accomplishments that I'm very, very proud of as superintendent of the state police and the commissioner of public safety. But I think the one that I need to talk about the most is the respect that I have for the state police and the work that I did to maintain the integrity and the reputation for excellence in the state police. Because here in this small state, sometimes the state police is known as the last bastion of ethical help when it comes to public corruption cases. So that's something that I would like to take to Washington, my background dealing with honesty and integrity.
Okay, thank you. Ted.
This question is from Peter in Little Compton. Mr. Doherty, you'll go first, please. What policy lesson should we take away from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars?
That's a great question. We have the best and the brightest military in the world. I believe that it's time that our troops come home with not a date certain for our enemies, but they've done great things there. But I know that we have had some serious difficulties lately with the tragedies during training, with our troops being killed by people that are supposed to be with us. So that's something that we need to work on, but there's not an exact science to that when you're in another region, in another country, and you really don't know the person next to you. So we need to work on improving how we interact with other agencies, policing, in that training.
Mr. Cicilline, same question. What policy lessons do you take away from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars?
I think we've learned, first of all, that our brave men and women are heroes in every way in the armed services. What they have been asked to do, they've done and more, and so we have to begin by saying we owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. But I think we also have to recognize that, particularly in Afghanistan, we've been at war now for 11 years. We will spend over $100 billion this year. We will build roads and bridges and train police officers halfway around the world when we're cutting the same things in our own country. And I think we have to learn that it is also the responsibility of the Afghan people to take responsibility for their own country and their own civilian and military operations, and understand that we, in moments such as this, have to direct those resources back to the urgent needs of our own country, because we can't be strong internationally if we're not strong at home. And I think I've been part of a growing number of members of Congress working with a Republican, Walter Jones, despite the claim I don't work with Republicans, who's been a real partner in pressing the administration and the president to accelerate in a responsible way the conclusion of our efforts in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mr. Cicilline. One of the major drawbacks for companies looking to expand or locate in Rhode Island is the perceived lack of a skilled workforce. And if I remember correctly, both of you mentioned the skills gap earlier in this debate. This question is appropriate then submitted by the Rhode Island Workforce Alliance. They emailed us and said, currently more than 3/4 of funding for workforce development programs is from federal sources, including the Workforce Investment Act, and they point out some scary times could be ahead with a fiscal cliff. Would you oppose any cuts in funding for workforce development programs? Mr. Doherty.
No, I would not, because I'm a big believer, especially right here in Rhode Island, that we need to fill those skill sets gap, fill that skill sets gap when we're working synergy with Congress and our local leaders here. I just had the opportunity to go to a forum last week at Rhode Island College, hosted by Leadership Rhode Island and the Providence Journal on the skill sets gap, and we learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from that.
I'm sorry to stop you. The question was worded a little oddly, so I want to make sure I heard your answer correctly. They asked, would you oppose any cuts in funding for workforce development programs? You said, no, I would not. Are you saying, do you mean actually that?
Okay, I would oppose cuts,
Okay,
too,
that's why I wanted to stop
because I think we need to bring more money, and I talked earlier about the Infrastructure, Jobs, and Energy Independence Act that I really believe in, and I believe that we could put a piece of that for the skill sets gap to bring training to our young folks that are graduating from high school that opt not to go to a four-year college, but they could embrace a program at one of our schools for a one-year program, a two-year program, because our manufacturing companies, all the manufacturing companies, everyone, barring none, that I've gone to have told me, I could hire 5 people tomorrow, I could hire 10 people tomorrow, but our skill sets gap here in Rhode Island, we just can't match the job description with the skills.
Are we actually going to have a moment of agreement here?
Well,
do you oppose any cuts to
not without
funding
the discussion. Of course, I oppose cuts, but this is really an important issue. It's important to Rhode Island. It's important to our country. This idea of how do we train people so they have the skills necessary for the jobs of the 21st century. You know, it's not your grandfather or your grandmother's manufacturer. You go to a manufacturing facility and many other kinds of jobs, and they require additional skills, particularly people who are making transitions to new jobs. But this is one where there's a big difference between the parties. The Republicans in Washington, in their first budget proposal of the fiscal year 2011, reduced funding for employment training by $2 billion and eliminated funding for the state grants, which would have been a cut of $40 million for the state of Rhode Island.
But he said he'd oppose it.
My point is, this is the Republican House leadership position that in this moment of record unemployment, we should be increasing investments in workforce training, and they propose to eliminate the state grant program. So this fundamentally misunderstands that we have an interest as an economy in investing in skills development for people, or we're not going to grow the economy. And they continue to propose deep cuts in workforce training.
Yeah,
it's a mistake.
This is one of those moments, again, where I feel like you're blaming those guys over there, and there's a guy standing next to you who said something completely different.
I'm not. I'm pleased to hear Mr. Doherty supports it. I'm just suggesting that the people that he'll keep in power don't.
All right, 30 seconds for you, Mr. Doherty.
I'll be real quick. So this is a fundamental difference between the congressman and I. We agree on this issue, but he's saying basically that he wasn't able to do anything about that cut in the training program. So do we want some, I've said this before, that by all major national media accounts, the Republicans will keep the House. Do we want someone at the table, someone who has a chair at the table, that can change that conversation and advocate for Rhode Island, or in all due respect to the congressman, someone on the outside banging on the window and can't be heard?
You know what, how about it? Why not elect a Republican if that's going to be the majority party?
First of all, I disagree with Mr. Doherty's assessment that the Republicans are going to hold on.
Well, what if they do? And he's right.
If they do, I think people have to vote for who they believe is going to go to Washington and fight for the things that matter to their families. You don't vote for the other team who oppose the Buffett rule, want to repeal health care, want to end the guarantee of Medicare, want to extend more tax cuts to millionaires, want to preserve subsidies for big oil. You vote for someone who you believe is going to go there and fight for you and for your family and the things that we need to do to get Rhode Island and our country back on the right track.
Okay, we have a lot of viewer questions, Mr. Doherty. So Ed, let's go to you with our next viewer question.
Yes, this is from Bill in Cumberland. Question for both candidates. Do you believe that the current federal gun laws are too strict or too lenient? And would you support a renewal of the 1994 federal assault weapons ban? Let's start with Mr. Cicilline.
Yes, I would support a renewal of the assault weapons ban. I've co-sponsored legislation in this Congress that would deal with what I think are some pretty egregious circumstances to ensure that multi-round ammunition is not available, to ensure that people who have mental illnesses and who are dangerous don't have access to firearms, to close the loophole that allows gun dealers who have their federal gun license revoked are then permitted under current regulations to convert their entire inventory to a personal collection and then dispose of it free of regulation. There are some serious weaknesses in our current gun safety legislation. I worked on that both as a state legislator. I co-sponsored legislation. I think we've got to close these loopholes, make sure that guns don't get in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. There's no reason for people to have assault weapons, so I support those pieces of legislation.
Doherty.
It would depend on what we're calling an assault rifle. There's some scary looking guns out there that are 22s. So if we're talking about a fully automatic weapon, I would never want those on the street at all. But we need to get guns out of the hands of the wrong people. We need to do a better job in getting guns out of the hands of criminals. I've actually, earlier in my career, have been in on gun task forces, federal gun task forces, and I just think that we need to put more effort into it, more work into it, and put more cops on the street in that area to get those guns off of the street. Now, I have a concern with the, as it relates to applying for a gun permit, where if someone has suffered from mental illness, all they need to do is check off no, and because of the HIPAA laws, the gun shop isn't able to check. In other words, if someone checks off that they haven't been convicted of a felony, the gun shops have the ability to check that record, but not with the mental health issues. So you could have someone who's, their doctor knows that they should not be anywhere near a gun, but they could actually unlawfully go in and purchase one.
Thank you,
Those are the people we need off the street.
This question is from Joe in Cumberland. He asks, and this will go first to Mr. Doherty, will you work to change U.S. laws to protect medical marijuana patients in states like Rhode Island where this treatment is legal? And if so, how would you do so?
Well, that's a great question, because I think we've sent a mixed message once again. Some areas of the country can have that, some can't. Listen, as it relates to the state law on legalizing marijuana, I was against that. I thought it sent a bad message to our kids. But medicinal marijuana, I have no problem with that. We should support that.
All right, Mr. Cicilline, same question to you.
Let me just say, if it's done the right way. Now earlier, 2 years ago, some of the bills that were submitted, there was not enough security.
These would be bills in the General Assembly in Rhode Island?
Yes.
Okay.
So if it's done the right way, because God forbid someone who's terminally ill, really, do we really care if they're able to smoke marijuana? It doesn't matter to me. As long as that person could alleviate their pain, I think it's the right thing to do.
Mr. Cicilline, same question to you, please.
Representative Tom Slater, who passed away, was the sponsor of that bill, and I certainly had the opportunity to speak to people who were suffering from painful and debilitating illnesses, and I think the idea of being sure that there's a mechanism so they have access to the treatment that will give them comfort, such as marijuana, ought to be, it absolutely should happen. And I think there's got to be some way to ensure that when a state legislature passes it, that determination is respected.
Now, just this person asks what to do about it, because as you know, the Obama administration has come out strongly against this in recent months.
I understand.
Have you pressed at all to change that, or will you?
Again, I think if there is a federal remedy that can be created, we ought to look at it in a very serious way.
Mr. Doherty, briefly, please.
Briefly, but that's where we need people to sit down at the table and work together. Now, we have state issues versus federal issues. The United States Attorney here in Rhode Island has gotten a message from Washington that Rhode Island won't have medicinal marijuana. So that's something that the state needs to work with the federal government, and it's really the United States Attorney in Washington should be taking that up.
All right, we have a question, very short question, from Pete in Providence. Mr. Cicilline, to you first. And he's asking for a simple response, two-word answer only. Are you pro-choice or pro-life?
Pro-choice.
And Mr. Doherty?
I am pro-life.
Okay. Let's go on to a non-policy question, if we can, for a moment. Just kind of take a breather from the policy. If you had a friend thinking of moving to Rhode Island, but was on the fence about it, Mr. Doherty, we'll start with you. What is the number one thing you would say to sell this state to convince them this is the place to call home?
The beautiful people and the beautiful, one thing, the beautiful people.
You'd sell the people of Rhode Island. All
Yes.
right, Mr. Cicilline, what would you sell?
Yeah, I would say it has the most extraordinary population of people from all over the world who make this an incredibly diverse and wonderful place to live.
Bipartisan.
Yeah, we have agreement between the two of you again tonight. Ed Acorn.
Well, let me ask this. Despite having good air and seaports, excellent higher education, wonderful cultural institutions, a prime location and great physical beauty, and as you both say, good people, Rhode Island has a dismal economy, a terrible unemployment rate, and America's worst business climate in a CNBC survey 2 years running. From your perspective, what caused these problems? Mr. Doherty, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, it's just a climate of a poor business attitude here. We just recently came in 50 out of 50 states for business-friendly states, and we know we have a high state corporate tax, and we have the highest federal corporate tax in the world. So, but just right here in Rhode Island, again, the skill sets gap, the high taxes, and it's just an overall poor attitude for businesses. We need to create public value propositions that command legitimacy by all the stakeholders, and that's the business community. We have 93,000 small businesses here in Rhode Island. We need to grow that, not by high taxes and regulations and the permitting process. I think we need to work on that, and I think we can do it. And back to Tim's question about talking to someone to come into Rhode Island, we can only go up from here.
Mr. Cicilline, same question.
Yeah,
From your perspective, what caused these problems?
I think it's a combination of things. I think obviously some piece of it is as a consequence of the national economy, obviously. But I think, the obvious permitting challenges, regulatory challenges, energy costs, lack of kind of salesmanship of our state, just good old-fashioned selling Rhode Island. But I also think, we have to be serious about the instances of public corruption in our state. When we're competing with businesses from around the country, when they see the instances of public corruption, there's a cost to that. I know that, in my own conversations when I was mayor, what preceded me had costs with it. And we were able to bring billions of dollars of new investment into the city in my 8 years. And, I used to refer to that as the trust dividend, because I think people have confidence that they're doing business with an honest, whether it's city, state government. And I think that kind of behavior has an economic cost that people don't always fully appreciate.
Mr. Doherty, I think you'll get a chance to say what you're thinking about in this next one. Congressman, I know you said earlier no one asks you in the 1st District about what happened with Providence's finances in your statement, but I must say we got a number of viewer questions, quite a few, so we kind of put them together to just do one. As you mentioned, in an interview with Tim last spring, you said you didn't use the right words talking about Providence's financial condition in 2010. How can these voters trust what you're telling them tonight is correct when you admit you weren't honest with them the last time you were on a debate stage?
Again, I've explained that I should not have described the city the way that I did. I've said that repeatedly. I think what I'm asking voters to do is look at my work and decide who do they believe they can count on to fight for them. I've spent the last 2 years fighting against Republican efforts to turn Medicare into a voucher, fighting against Republican efforts to give another tax break to millionaires and billionaires, fighting to end subsidies for big oil, fighting to reinvigorate manufacturing, fighting to protect investments in education and infrastructure, and against this very extreme Republican agenda that's been put forth by the House Republican leaders. So I think, what I'm asking people is first to judge me on the work I did for 8 years and not on one soundbite in a debate, but also to look at the work that I'm doing to fight for the things that I know matter to Rhode Island, and fighting against House Republicans that have a very different vision for the kind of America they're trying to build and what their future looks like.
Mr. Doherty, you must admit none of us would want one word we uttered to be our permanent legacy.
No. And you notice that the congressman turns the heat up on the radical Republican agenda, and to try and dissuade us from thinking about him saying the city was in excellent financial condition, then later saying it was threatened. But actually, it goes back to his other statement about public corruption. I believe you mentioned about giving Rhode Island a black eye. Well, we're on policy, but since we're on policy, I wanted to say that honesty is the best policy. And when I was in the state police, I made sure that all of our investigations we didn't leave any stone unturned. And some of those investigations actually were in the city of Providence and pertain to some issues in the city of Providence that we worked with the Providence Police with. But also, when we're talking about public corruption, what about, let me call you on this. You told these fellas that you didn't know Erasmo Ramirez, but yet you gave him a $103,000 secured loan, and then later had to admit that, yeah, Erasmo did work on my campaign.
Mr. Doherty, we don't have a section in this debate where you can ask the candidate a question, but since
I just made a statement.
But
Thank you.
Since he brought it up, if you feel like you need the opportunity to respond.
Look, I took over a city. I'm not going to be lectured by Mr. Doherty about public corruption. I took over a city that was described by 2 federal courts as an ongoing criminal enterprise. I took over a city that had a deficit, that people had lost faith in city government, a police department where there was evidence people bought jobs and bought promotions, and we went to work for 8 years and did extraordinary things that I'm proud of. So I'm not going to be lectured on that, but the reality is, my point is that kind of corruption that cities and towns have gone through in our state hurts economic development. That's my point.
And please don't think I was being rude while I was checking my iPhone earlier. I wasn't checking Twitter or anything. We have a lot of questions still coming in on email, so I wanted to check in, and one came in from Leslie in Cumberland, and she wanted to talk about something I had for the first half of the debate. We ran out of time, and that was this issue of a municipal federal bailout. I'm going to start with Mr. Doherty, and then a specific question to you, Mr. Cicilline, on it. Mr. Doherty, your campaign blasted Mr. Cicilline for supporting legislation that would provide a $10 billion bailout for Detroit, while not offering one for Rhode Island and its troubled cities and towns. So are you saying that you would support a federal bailout for Rhode Island?
No, I don't think we need a federal bailout because we'd be bailing cities and towns out all over the United States of America, and it would just put more on our $16 trillion debt. My point of sending that out was the fact that we have cities and towns hurting right here in Rhode Island: Woonsocket, Central Falls, Pawtucket, East Providence. God almighty, why are we thinking about Detroit when the congressman, in all due respect to him, he represents the 1st District of Rhode Island?
Yeah, but with all due respect to you, your press release didn't say that. And let me read it. It said, "Don't Rhode Islanders deserve the same help? We need a representative in Congress who will put Rhode Island first. Don't Rhode Islanders deserve the same help?" That's not, I oppose this idea. So were you spinning in your press release?
No. Don't Rhode Island cities and towns need the same help from Congressman Cicilline to look at areas where he can help out those cities and towns? I'm not saying that we should take the federal tax dollars from those cities and towns and return it back to them.
And to you then, and last time I checked, the federal taxes were taken out of my paycheck, so why should I be paying for a bailout to a different troubled city 700 miles away?
Right. You shouldn't, and if Mr. Doherty's team did their research, they would know that I'm not a sponsor of that bill, that I was erroneously added to it in 2 days after it was filed, went to the House floor, and I was removed. So I'm not a co-sponsor of the bill. But
do you support the idea?
No.
So absolutely would not.
Co-sponsored it, though.
I am not a co-sponsor.
You can't unring the bell.
Hold on, Mr. Doherty.
You can't unring the bell,
what you're saying is it was a clerical error?
I was added to the bill by the sponsor erroneously. I went to the House floor the moment I learned of it. I was removed from the bill. I am not a co-sponsor of the bill. But importantly, every single day, the work that I'm doing, along with Senator Reid, Senator Whitehouse, Congressman Langevin, is designed to help cities and towns in our state, whether it's bringing federal resources that we work together on and the jobs that come with it, whether it's helping individual constituents, whether it's fighting for legislation. That's what we do every day. Obviously, cities and towns are all challenged, and the idea of the federal government investing in specific cities and towns isn't something we can afford.
Do you retract that press release then, Mr. Doherty? He's saying that it was a mistake. He doesn't support that.
He can't unring the bell.
Okay, why don't we move on? Mr. Acorn, a question?
Yes, you both touched on this a little bit in the first hour, but I wonder if you could be more specific. Mr. Doherty, how would you characterize your opponent's views on women's issues, and why should women vote for you rather than for Mr. Cicilline?
Well, you know, there has been, as David had mentioned, the Congressman had mentioned, I did have a press conference and highlight some of those cases that he had worked, only because he opened the door for that. So I would categorize it as hypocritical.
Mr. Cicilline.
I'm very proud that I have the support of many national women's organizations because of my very long record of standing up and fighting for women. The Republicans in Washington have tried to, at least in the House, to prevent the enactment of a Strengthened Violence Against Women Act. As I said, more than 300 organizations opposed the House bill, including the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the National Congress of American Indians, and the National Organization for Women. I fought to protect women's right to full reproductive health care. I fought to protect women's right for equal pay for equal work. I'm fighting for a Strengthened Violence Against Women Act. I believe that the work that I have done has earned me the broad support of women because they know they can count on me to stand up and fight for the things that matter to them. And the president of the National Organization of Women said it was appallingly insensitive, I think, to have a press conference about domestic violence in front of a boxing ring. But look, my record in Washington, the work that I've done, has earned me the support of national organizations, of lots of women in this district. I'm proud to stand up and fight for women, and if I get to go back to Congress, I'll continue to fight and stand up for women.
Go ahead, Mr.
Can I
Doherty.
speak to that for 1 second? So the theme of that, I have to speak to the theme of that, having it in a boxing gym, is because I was just tired of the rhetoric coming over from the Cicilline camp that was not true. So the theme of that was the gloves are off. I think that anyone who knows me and has ever worked with me knows how hard I worked for domestic violence training and sexual harassment training and training pertaining to protecting women. And as a matter of fact, in criminal investigations, when we would have a woman stalked or if a woman was a battered woman, I put extra detectives on that and to send the message to the batterer that we meant business, and I sent a personal message to them. So I'm very proud of the work that I did protecting women in Rhode Island, men, women, and children right here in Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Ted.
Mr. Cicilline, surveys show a majority of Democrats think global warming is mostly man-made. In 2009, House Democrats approved a so-called cap-and-trade bill to cap carbon emissions and create a program for trading carbon permits, but it died in the Senate. Do you support a cap-and-trade program?
I think it really depends on what the program design is. I think we have to be serious about carbon emissions. I think the science is irrefutable. We need an energy policy that both produces and incentivizes the production of clean and renewable energy, and I think we should look at all options.
And if you'd been in the House in 2009, do you think you would have supported that bill?
I don't know that particular bill, so I don't know. But I mean, I think we have got to look at every tool that is available to reduce carbon emissions.
Mr. Doherty, the same surveys show many Republicans remain skeptical that global warming is mostly man-made. Do you think humans are contributing significantly to climate change? And if so, do you think anything should be done about that?
I think, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change it continues to look at that. The Kyoto Protocol, which is the footprint for the United Nations reduction of greenhouse gases. I think that's important to keep looking at it. I'm not one that will stand here and tell you that no, mankind is not attributed to our greenhouse gases. We know in the last century that our temperature has risen 1.4 degrees, and that's important that we continue to look at that. I think your question was, would I vote for
a cap-and-trade
program? Cap-and-trade. No, I think it's something we need to continue to look at. We're in very, very difficult financial times right now. There's a time to fish and there's a time to mend your nets, and we need to mend our nets. I don't agree with cap-and-trade.
Gentlemen, we've made it to our final question of the evening, and I don't think it'll surprise either of you that we received a few emails on the issue of tolls on the Cicilline River Bridge. This is something that is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts down there and their wallets. And for people who are unfamiliar, the little background, the Rhode Island General Assembly passed a law allowing tolls to go up in the Cicilline River Bridge starting as early as 2013 to pay for maintenance on the state's major bridges. Both of you have actually come out in opposition of the tolls. But I'm wondering, and we'll start with you, Mr. Doherty, is it fair to the drivers who use the Newport Pell Bridge, who right now shoulder the entire burden?
No, I think that we need to change the Highway Trust Fund formula going forward. That's what I was talking about when I had a press conference on Aquidneck Island. I just believe that the Cicilline River Bridge is a bridge that connects two neighborhoods. I have friends in those neighborhoods, the Common Fence Point and Tiverton. It connects two neighborhoods. It's not like, and I'm sure this happens in Newport as well, but that people travel over the bridge a couple of times a day. But in the Cicilline River Bridge, I know people that go over that 7, 8 times a day. So we need to find a better way to pay for that bridge.
The better way that you have it to pay for the bridge, then, would it be enough to tear down the toll booth on the Newport Pell?
It'll be one of the first things I look at when I get to Congress in January 2013. We need to change the Highway Trust Fund formula.
Mr. Cicilline, you're in Congress, so this is an important issue to a lot of people. What have you done about it?
No, I think this is a very important issue, and I think it actually raises a very significant kind of public policy question. I believe very strongly that we have got to invest in a serious way in rebuilding and maintaining the infrastructure of our country. I think every time you toll roads, you're moving toward privatization of public infrastructure. And so there has been a real effort. I'm a co-sponsor of the National Infrastructure Bank, but there's a real effort to increase in the transportation bill the federal role in infrastructure by increasing our investment. It's a way to put people to work right away. It's something which has to happen. The longer we wait, the more expensive it becomes, because it's like deferred maintenance on your car. It becomes more serious. And frankly, if we don't address some of these issues, we're going to see what we saw in New Orleans, what we saw in Minnesota. We're going to see really serious public safety issues. So I think if the federal government plays an appropriate role in investing in public infrastructure, it will leave the maintenance opportunities, or reduce the maintenance costs for local governments and states. So I think, again, I want to just make the point that the Republicans in the House have been fighting against increasing and have been proposing decreasing investments in infrastructure.
Blaming Republicans is one thing.
But that's who's in control of Congress.
Hang on, Mr. Doherty, why not use your bully pulpit? You're a congressman, and what you're talking about seems very long-term to me. These things could go up in just a couple of years. Is there anything that you could do now?
My office has looked at that. I don't know that there is a federal solution that would stop it, but we're studying it. Obviously, I've heard from lots of constituents about it, and so we're reviewing to see, is there some federal role? There doesn't seem to be an obvious thing to me of what the federal government could do, even if we were in a position to do it, but we're looking to see if there are any options, because I know people are very, very upset about it and very strongly opposed to it.
Specifically, Mr. Doherty, as congressman, do you think there is a role a congressman could play to shut it down?
I absolutely do, and that'll be one of my first. One of the first things I do when I get there in January of 2013. But I really believe we need to change the formula of the Highway Trust Fund. And there are
again, isn't that a long-term?
That is long-term, but there are other projects coming to Rhode Island. There are monies earmarked for other projects in Rhode Island, and we just need to help the state out so the state doesn't have to put that toll there. Now, there have been several meetings that I've attended in Portsmouth regarding this, and as a matter of fact, I was at the opening of the new bridge, and Congressman Cicilline wasn't there. And Congressman Cicilline wasn't at any of the meetings that I attended pertaining to this bridge, so evidently it's not that important to him.
I'll give you the final word, Mr. Cicilline.
I think you should be very conscious of what your powers are as a member of Congress, and to exploit people's frustration with that by just going to a meeting. I've heard from lots of constituents. I've met with many people who have talked to me about it. I understand the opposition, and I'm focusing my time on finding out if there is in fact a role we play, if there is in fact something we do at the federal level, and it seems to me that's what I should be doing.
Gentlemen, we are out of time. Again, I want to echo, it's been an honor to moderate this debate this evening, and I want to thank the Eyewitness News viewers watching on WPRI.com for sending in your great questions. And don't forget to catch our coverage tonight on WPRI 12 at 11 o'clock and on Eyewitness News at 10 o'clock on Fox Providence. For Ted Nesi and Ed Acorn, I'm Tim White. Thank you very much. Good job.